I hope it's not getting too complicated anyway, but let's start now. So Jane already gave you a very nice introduction into the history of food packaging, so I can keep this very, very short. So as she said, for thousands of years, people have used the traditional materials like wood, metal, glass, ceramics, plants and fibers, and also leather to transport or store or somehow handle their food. And only around 1900, food packaging materials, the production of food packaging materials started to be industrialized. So paper and board and also glass packaging was manufactured really in factories at that time, started to become produced in big amounts. And for example, the egg carton has been patented in 1911, I've read that. And in 1933, beverage cans were introduced for beers, although they have been invented much earlier, food cans. Plastics became prominent in the second part of the last century. For example, PET bottles, yogurt cups, the multi-layer materials like Tetra packs, which include plastics and paper and board, and also multi-layer plastics, which are more fancy materials, which consist of of different layers of different plastics, but no other materials. And then Jane also mentioned the active and intelligent packaging. I don't know, have you heard about it? Do you know what it is? No, okay. So it's a European legal term, I guess, but it also appears in the science. So active packaging means the packaging itself destroys, for example, some microorganisms in your food. So it actively kills some of the bacteria that could spoil your food. That's one example. Intelligent packaging could tell you whether your food is already spoiled or not. So you have a certain label which can change the color and then tell you, oh, now it's not good anymore. So that is on the rise, I would say. And all these materials can only be produced if you have some other materials such as printing inks, adhesives, coatings and varnishes present so that you can really fulfill all the functions. So to be able to produce these food packaging materials and types, you need all different kinds of chemicals. So you see the list here, I'm not going to read it. And it's not comprehensive. There are many, many different other groups of chemicals you could add to this list. So we could say, okay, but that's convenient, but we all know, we are here, there are some problems with it. The environmental side of food packaging, of course, but also the chemical side. So we all know chemicals can migrate from food contact materials, Jen has introduced the term already, and they may affect human health. So therefore we need to work on these topics. So I will just try to give you an overview of the chemical side. So I think we have to ask 3 questions about the chemicals in food packaging. So first we need to know which chemicals are used to produce FCMs. Then, this is different, which chemicals are present in the final FCM. And what do we don't know, or what do we not know about all these chemicals? And I have the pleasure to introduce you, or to introduce you to the Food Contact Chemicals database, which has been released last week, and Xenia has compiled this fantastic database. So you see the link on the slide. I think you get the slides, otherwise we can provide it to you. It's a list of chemicals derived from international regulations and also industry inventories. And it contains 11,000 chemicals. And Pete already introduced the term NIAS. And in contrast, we also like to use the term intentionally added substances. So this FCC database contains 11,000 chemicals that may be intentionally used to produce a food packaging. But still, this is a big amount of information, but we don't know all about it, because we have these 11,000 chemicals, and we know they are of potential relevance for the manufacture of FCMs. That's why they entered these lists. That's why legislators have taken them on the list, or industry has collected them on lists. But are they really used in the manufacture of FCMs? Nobody tells us, because it's not public what is in such a material. So we are pretty sure that quite a number of these chemicals are not used in the manufacture. Maybe they have never been used, we don't know. But of course we know many of them which are used. Let me give you some examples. So if you look at the 5 packaging types Jane introduced, plastic, paper and board, metal, glass and multi-layers, I just picked up some, like, you could call them random examples of IS, of chemicals you need to produce certain materials. So for plastics, to form the polymer, the structure of a plastic, you need the monomer. So, for example, styrene, BPA, ethylene. Then you need to put some additives inside, and again, some random additives. Phthalates are plasticizers to make the plastic soft. Then there are so-called hindered amine stabilizers to prevent photodegradation. There are antioxidants such as Irganox. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. I would say Irganox. In paper and board, you have, of course, the cellulose material, so usually from wood, but it could also be from other plants. Then you have fillers, for example, titanium dioxide. You may use optical brightness to make the paper look white. There's one group of chemicals, it's still bean disulfonic acids. It's not so commonly, or you probably haven't heard about that one. Then you have UV photoinitiators in printing inks, which are almost always applied on paper and board packaging. And they're a famous group are the benzophenones. If you go to the metals, you need to produce the metal. So either you have an aluminum can, which is made of only aluminum, or you have a steel can that is usually made of iron and coated with a tin layer. And all these metal cans, or most of them, are coated with an additional organic coating. You've seen it there. And that's also a polymeric material. And there are completely different types of coatings. So you can use bisphenol A-based chemicals, so-called batch. So bisphenol diglycidyl ether. You can use ethyl acrylate. You can use, for acrylic coatings, you can use phenols and aldehydes for phenolic coatings, and many, many more. Talking about glass, if you produce glass, you apply silica, soda ash, limestone, and metal salts. But usually glass bottles or containers need a lid. So there you also have other materials coming into contact with your food. And for example, if you need a soft sealing to really make the lid tight, you add plasticizers in the gaskets. For example, epoxidized soybean oil is one of them. And phthalates, of course, could be on this list too. And the last group of chemical materials are the multi-layer materials. And they are composed of plastic, paper, and board and metal, so you can look at the list further up. But you have to stick these materials to each other, so you have to glue them. So then adhesives come into the game, and they are also very often polymers. So you need monomers to produce the final adhesive, which is really sticking then. And depending on the chemistry, there are isocyanates, polyols, ethylene, and vinyl acetate. Could be some examples for chemicals in adhesives. Okay, so we know that many of the chemicals are used in the final FCM, but do we also know whether they are present in the final FCM? That's the next question, the next level. And you've heard the word monomer, for example. And you've heard the word additive quite often already today. So if I talk about an additive, that usually stays in the material. I just give it into my reaction mixture. If I produce a plastic or a printing ink or also pigments, they just stay. I mix them, they are in the final material. But if I use a monomer, that will be connected one by one to have a long chain of molecules in the end, and that doesn't stay. So that's converted to something else. So even if I know my starting substance, my intentionally added substance in the beginning, I don't have that one in the end. So we need to think about the reaction products, and that's, at least in European regulation, that's a big gap, because people are only talking about the starting substances. Now I come to the non-intentionally added substances, the NIAs. And here I can't give you a number. There are estimates out there talking about up to 100,000 NIAs. We don't know. They are not intentionally added to the reaction, and they can be grouped into 3 different kinds of according to the origin, let's say it like this. So there can be the contaminants. If I have a starting substance, it may be contaminated. They are not completely pure. They are usually of technical grade. So I have my main starting substances and something else beside. if I do a reaction and I intend to have this reaction, there's always, very often, let's say it like this, side reactions occurring. And depending on how well I know the reaction, how good the control is, there are other nyes appearing. And then there are also chemicals which are intended to be degraded during use. Many of the additives are. So if I have an antioxidant that is added, and I know it's there in the beginning, but it reacts with oxygen, and then I have something else in the end. So that's also NIAS. Probably a well-known NIAS, but still, I didn't add it. Here I give you some examples of NIAS. So for the contaminants, we have heard about that quite some times already. Phthalates in recycled plastics and paper and board have been measured frequently. And recycling is a very big issue if you talk about contaminants. There are also mineral oil hydrocarbons in recycled paper and board. Many studies have been published about that topic. Brominated flame retardants have been found in black plastics, and they are probably coming from recycling of non-food grade materials, so it's illicit use. And Then, I didn't see the small one. Lead in glass is also a contaminant. That's another origin because it really is usually in the raw material, and depending on the lead content of the raw material, it ends up in the glass. Going on to the side reaction products. So there are examples. Primary aromatic amines in multi-layer packaging could be one. So these are highly carcinogenic substances which occur if adhesives are not really properly cured to the end. So if the reaction stops, then there are oligomers in the production of can coatings, a whole bunch of chemicals you can find there. Similarly, oligomers in polyolefins, the degradation products in final polymers, like in polycarbonate, you have found oligomers, antioxidants in foils, as I've given that as example already, and also photoinitiators can degrade. Okay, I have to finish up now with some ways forward. No, I have to say something else. So these examples are just examples of chemicals that occur in packaging. It's very important. I don't talk about migration. That Maricel will do. So these chemicals are there, but we don't know whether they migrate. Or for many of them we know, but don't take it as granted that these chemicals immediately end up in your food. That's a disclaimer. But anyway, to give you a way forward, everybody should know the starting materials. Manufacturers should know, and I think also we should know quite a bit about this. The public should know. Manufacturers should really know the processes. And if you talk sometimes to people producing food packaging, you get the idea there is room for improvement, maybe. Then we have to shift the analysis of food packaging from the starting materials to the final products. That's very important. And after doing this, communication has to improve in the supply chain, and I should have added this also, I think, to the public, so people should know what is happening there. And with that, I would like to finish.